We have units around. What happened?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
50 entries, 7 levels. This is the second part of our deep dive into photos found on the internet with some of the most disturbing backgrounds ever. The devil is in the details, and these pictures prove that. Things may seem unsettling, but relatively normal at first, but the deeper we go, the more disturbing it's going to get. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. H.R. Truman. Harry R. Truman was a man who personified the true American raggedness. He was a stubborn whiskey-drinking lodge owner who lived near Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is an active volcano located in Washington and is known for having one of the deadliest eruptions ever recorded in history way back in 1981. That's precisely when H.R. Truman lost his life. When the volcano showed signs of erupting in early 1980, evacuation measures were put in place, but Truman made it clear he wasn't going anywhere. He had spent over 50 years running the Mount St. Helens Lodge on the shores of Spirit Lake and was understandably reluctant. In his own words, the man wasn't about to let some goddamn geologists tell him what to do. Despite weeks of earthquakes and warnings of an inevitable eruption, Truman flat out refused to evacuate. He became somewhat of a folk hero among the locals. The media at the time were straight up eating up his grumpy defiance. He gave interviews where he insisted that if the mountain he was living on was to go down, he would go down with it. Which he tragically did. On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted with the force of a nuclear bomb. The entire north face of the volcano collapsed in a massive landslide, the largest in recorded history. It basically sent a pyroclastic flow of burning ash and rock barreling down at speeds of up to 600 miles per hour. Everything in its path was instantly obliterated. Truman, his lodge, and his 16 cats were buried under roughly 150 feet of volcanic debris. His body was never recovered, and neither was any trace of the lodge. Afterward, a bunch of photos of Truman standing in front of the mountain right before its eruption surfaced. He was shown to be completely unaware, or perhaps just unwilling to accept, that he was about to be erased from existence. Aaron Dwanke. On December 27, 2022, Aaron Dwanke sent his family a cheerful selfie of himself standing in front of a half-frozen Missouri River. By all accounts, he was no amateur. His loved ones described him as an experienced adventurer who was well-versed in extreme trekking and high-risk locations. At this point, navigating dangerous terrain was second nature to him. Unfortunately, that selfie would be the last anyone would ever see of Dwanke. According to police reports and witness statements, he had been ice skating on the Missouri River and was expected to arrive downstream later that day, but he never did. At first, his family wasn't too concerned. By this time, they were used to his thrill-seeking antics, and Dwanke was already a well-known kayaker with a reputation for pushing the limits. Even the photos and videos taken before his disappearance showed no signs of distress. He seemed completely at ease. But after a few days of radio silence, his family started to worry. When he still hadn't surfaced, they reported him missing. That was back in 2022. Despite extensive searches, nothing was ever found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. With no remains to confirm his fate, Aaron Dwanke was eventually presumed dead, leaving behind nothing but that final, oblivious photo as his lasting legacy. Flooding. Hurricane Helene left the southeastern United States in ruins last year. It caused devastation beyond what most people saw on the news. While the media focused on the destruction in general, there were countless personal stories that emerged on social media, each one more heartbreaking than the last. One of the most haunting accounts came from a woman named Jessica Dry Turner, who shared a now viral Facebook post on September 27th. The post was initially a hopeful one that was meant to raise awareness of the horrendous devastation caused in the affected areas. It included a photo taken by one of the victims themselves, showing Jessica's parents and nephew on the roof of their house. They were waiting to be rescued. Before the updates, the entire post carried a tinge of hopefulness. Jessica explained that her parents and young nephew had taken refuge on their roof with nothing but the clothes on their backs. She described how the victims were seeing massive 18-wheelers floating by them effortlessly with no problem. She bravely added that despite their own predicament, it's not her parents who need the 911 rescue as much as so many other people. But then came the update no one wanted to see. Jessica's parents and nephew were swept away by the flood. They didn't make it. Her sister Megan miraculously survived after being accidentally wedged between debris that blocked the current from pulling her under. In the following days, authorities searched for the bodies of the deceased. They eventually located her nephew's remains about a quarter mile from their home. Jessica later added a heartbreaking note to her post that she still waits for her mom to call her every day. Sometimes no amount of preparation or hope can stop a disaster from taking everything. Austin Howell. Free solo climbing is one of the most terrifying yet exhilarating things one can experience. The entire activity depends on no ropes, no harnesses for safety, just a person's sheer strength and concentration. Unfortunately, it also comes with the knowledge that one accidental slip doesn't mean a bad injury, it means certain death. And if there was ever someone who embodied this sort of free yet reckless spirit, it was Austin Howell, a free solo climber known for his absolutely fearless climbs and his relatable posts about mental health. Austin wasn't just a climber, he was a free soloist who thrived on the thrill of deliberately scaling dangerous localities with no safety net. And the guy was dedicated, to the point that he even devoted his entire life to it, despite racking up some of the nastiest injuries imaginable. His first was a bad misstep at his university's indoor rock wall, where he fell down and fractured his skull horribly, in addition to fracturing 3 vertebrae and multiple bones. The other time was a fall on El Capitan's nose in 2015. This left him with another highly traumatic brain injury in addition to a broken wrist and 5 vertebrae in his neck. Yet every time it happened, he recovered and climbed again despite his parents' apprehension. He even had a motto that he immortalized on his Instagram page: "The best climber in this world is the one having the most fun." And for years, he did just that. Until one tragic climb in North Carolina. On June 30th, 2019, Austin set out for Shortoff Mountain in Linville Gorge. It was already known for its challenging rock faces and was a hotspot amongst climbers. He was accompanied by a photographer who had been taking his pictures all day, but after a while the photographer left and Austin decided to go at it one more time. What happened next is unclear, but around 11:30 a.m., nearby climbers heard a scream, "No!" and then haunting silence. Austin had fallen roughly 80 feet to his death. The climbers who witnessed the incident reported that it wasn't Austin's fault. He definitely had a hold break on him. They also recall the tragic silence after the no, as if he'd accepted the grim reality of him not making it out of this one alive. His last picture shows Austin brightly smiling at the camera, dangling on the same mountain he fell from moments later. Level 2. Pulitzer Prize-winning photo. John L. Gaunt was a photographer for the Los Angeles Times who took one of the most haunting photographs ever, and ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize for it. The picture captured a couple by the name of John and Lillian McDonald standing at the edge of Hermosa Beach, California. They were locked in an embrace that initially gave off a very cinematic vibe, but later turned out to be horrifying. The two were embracing not out of love, but out of pure, soul-crushing grief and concern. Turns out, just moments earlier, their 19-month-old son had vanished into the ocean. This wasn't supposed to happen. Michael, their son, had just been playing in the yard but had managed to sneak out of the house in a matter of seconds, completely unnoticed. By the time his parents had realized he was gone, it was too late. He had made his way to the shore where the tide swept him away. A desperately frantic search by the local authorities followed. A local woman even reported seeing a baby floating in the seaweed, but despite all efforts, the ocean gave nothing back. Michael's tiny body appeared near Manhattan Beach, miles from where he disappeared a few days later. Gaunt was completely unaware of everything and just happened to live nearby. He took out his camera and took a single shot of the grieving parents. He didn't need words. The image alone said everything. The photo ran on the front page the next day and hit like a gut punch. It captured something so raw, so human, that it earned Gaunt the 1955 Pulitzer Prize for photography. But for Michael's parents, the nightmare wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be. The photograph that came out of the tragedy now remains as one of the most haunting images in history. Duck crossing. There are certain people out there whose kindness knows no bounds, to the point that they even lose their lives for it. The duck crossing incident occurred on May 22, 2023 in California, where a man, Casey Rivera, was picking up his kids from swim practice when the three saw a mother duck struggling to cross the heavy traffic street with her ducklings. Casey instantly got out of the car to help the mother duck and her ducklings cross. They were at an intersection of Park Drive and Stanford Ranch Boulevard on the tragically fated day, and he simply wanted to do something nice in front of his kids. Naturally, his children were also very proud of him and were recording his very unique and adorable interaction with the animals. Unfortunately, what they didn't realize was that this was their father's last moment. Rivera managed to get the duck and her ducklings across safely. He was being applauded by the onlookers and was simply going back to his car to his kids. That's when tragedy struck. Another car driving eastbound struck Casey as he was walking back to his car. The entire thing was not only witnessed by his children, but also by everyone who was initially cheering for him. A moment of joy for everyone in the area instantly became a disaster. Casey was unfortunately declared dead on the spot. He is survived by his two children and wife, who understandably cannot get over the loss. Brian Pata. Brian Pata was a star football player for the team Miami Hurricanes who was brutally shot after a normal day at practice. On November 7th, 2006, Pata had just wrapped up for the day and was headed home. For him, it was just another regular day that would end with him parking his car and heading home. Unfortunately, it wasn't anywhere near normal. Moments after he parked his car outside his apartment complex, he was shot and killed. At the time of the shooting, there were absolutely no witnesses or suspects. The entire incident was just a promising 22-year-old gunned down out of nowhere. The lack of almost any concrete evidence made this case a very hard one. It remained a cold case for 15 years until 2021 when everything changed. Police arrested Pata's own teammate, Rashawn Jones. The worst part is that Jones was seen not only on the on-field memorial held for Pata back in 2006, but was also photographed kneeling and crying over it. Police finally managed to gather enough evidence, including a hands-on witness, to arrest Jones and charge him of murder. According to sources, Jones and Pata had clashed numerous times before, to the point where Pata had already suspected some sort of life-threatening animosity from him. He even reportedly told his brother about it, but did not say anything to his team or coach. Apparently, Jones was not only holding a grudge over football-related tensions, but was also personally frustrated with the late footballer. He was even suspended from the team at one point, but sadly, no one thought their beef would go this far. When the news broke, it was a gut punch to everyone who had waited for answers. Justice may have finally caught up, but the image of Jones on Pata's memorial can only be described as downright sinister. Granite Mountain Hotshots. Granite Mountain Hotshots were a team of elite wildland firefighters known as the Granite Mountain Hotshots, who lost their lives in the devastating Yarnell Hill fire. These guys had faced the worst of battling devastating wildfires, but couldn't survive the one on June 30th, 2013. The entire group was out in Arizona fighting the devastating Yarnell Hill fire that morning of the dreadful day. Unfortunately, like most of these incidents, these guys were completely unaware that this would be their final mission. During that moment in their firefighting mission, the fire was dangerous but manageable, which gave them no reason to believe it would turn deadly. But wildfires are unpredictable. At some point in the afternoon, winds began to shift, and so did the direction of the fire. The fire suddenly cut off the group's only escape route and trapped them in a box canyon. They had nowhere to go, and their only option was to deploy their emergency fire shelters. It's a thin aluminum cover designed to deflect heat in life-or-death situations. Unfortunately, it's only used as a last resort and doesn't really do much against prolonged exposure to very hot environments. Similarly, in this case, the fire was burning at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and simply wasn't enough to save the hotshots' lives. 19 of the 20 hotshots lost their lives that day. The only survivor was stationed away from the group as a lookout. There's a picture of the group standing in front of a tree, posing gleefully after the 2013 Joche fire. Omagh bombing. Fernando Baselga and his daughter were just two people enjoying their day in Omagh, North Ireland. In it, the father-daughter duo was seen standing and smiling near a red Vauxhall Cavalier parked on the street. They were posing like any other family, taking a casual photo, and were completely unaware of what was about to happen. The very car they stood next to was actually a bomb that was about to take 29 lives and injure over 2,000 people. It was August 15th, 1998, a busy Saturday afternoon in Omagh, North Ireland, when this devastating incident occurred. It was like any other day in the area. The streets were packed with people going about their day when a warning call came in about a potential bomb. The call, unfortunately, was very vague and misleading, and even ended up causing more harm than good. Police weren't sure where the actual bomb was located, so they unknowingly began directing people toward the very spot of it. While authorities scrambled around to clear the area as much as they could, by the time anyone realized the true location of the bomb, it was too late. The real Irish Republican Army was the one responsible for this horrific act. They were a splinter group of the IRA and had problems with the ceasefire that was signed. As a result, they planted a car bomb loaded with 500 pounds of explosives right in the heart of the town. The bomb went off at around 3 p.m., instantly killing more than a dozen people and leaving a scene of absolute devastation. The force of the bomb was catastrophic, especially considering how it was in the middle of a busy shopping street. It not only took the lives of people standing near it, it caused a lot of infrastructure damage in the area as well. As for the people in the picture, they both thankfully survived, but no one can deny that the once ordinary, harmless family photo became much darker, and is now forever tied to one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in Northern Ireland's history. Darren Mitchell. Darren Charles Mitchell was a National Guardsman from Navasota, Texas, who found himself stuck on a highway in the Kansan, Texas floods. He was just trying to get home on his truck on May 26, 2016, when the floodwaters rose beyond comprehension and trapped him in his vehicle. He was initially fine with the entire thing, and his sister even said that he told his family he had managed to get out safely. He took a photo of his absurd situation and posted it to Facebook. The image showed his vehicle nearly submerged in murky brown floodwater. He captioned it with a simple, "All I wanted to do was go home." Witnesses later recalled seeing Darren step out of the truck, likely trying to assess the situation. He eventually got back inside, and that was when the flood took him. The current flipped his truck and swept it away. Search teams found his body downstream days later. His truck was already completely upside down and totaled. Level 3. Ayano Tokumaso. The most unsettling pictures are those that look relatively unassuming but hold a dark history behind them. This can be attributed to a picture taken at Niagara Falls by a couple, Andrea Smith and Jason Watson. The picture portrays nothing unusual, just the two standing in front of the site with their arms around each other and a bunch of other people surrounding them. What they do not realize, though, is the fact that one person in the background would fall to her inevitable death just moments later. Ayano Tokumaso was a 20-year-old English exchange student at Toronto's Hunza Language Center originally hailing from Japan. She was visiting the Niagara Falls with a boyfriend for a sightseeing trip. Like most people who see the gigantic wonder for the first time, she was excited beyond belief and wanted to immortalize her experience through a picture. That's when she decided to go beyond the safety railings to take as good of a photo as she could. However, because of how high the waterfalls are and how fast the flowing water is, the minute she did that, her body couldn't sustain it. She lost her footing and fell down backward. Naturally, because of how rapid the flowing water is, she was simply swept away. Authorities were instantly on the case and were doing everything they could to find her, hopefully alive, but tragically, her body was reported to be floating in the lower part of the Niagara River a few days after her fall. The picture of the couple that made internet rounds after Ayana's death show her in the background. She's standing on the edge of the railing, just like witnesses claim, completely unaware that she's almost about to lose her life. The little boy in the Spider-Man costume. William Tyrell was just a 3-year-old kid running around in his little Spider-Man suit when he disappeared without a trace. What the world didn't know was how his disappearance would turn into one of the longest, most frustrating cold cases ever. It was September 12, 2014, and William was at his foster grandmother's house in Kendal, New South Wales, pretending to be a superhero. As mentioned before, he was dressed in his Spider-Man suit and was in his front yard playing with his sister. His foster mom had just concluded taking pictures of him and had gone inside to make tea. In the last known photo of William taken that morning, he's crouched down like a lion, mid-roar, and has a bright grin on his face. It's a kind of picture that turns into a sweet memory years later, but sadly this time around, it became a haunting reminder of the last time he was ever seen. His foster mother and grandmother were inside when everything went quiet. When they went out to see what was wrong, there was nothing. William had disappeared into thin air. A frantic search for the boy started immediately, with everyone taking part, but to no avail. The following investigation into William's disappearance has been filled with more questions than answers. There is barely any evidence to suggest literally anything. Some people believe he was abducted. Others suspect something more tragic happened closer to home. His foster mother has been under observation for some time now. Certain reports suggest that William might have died accidentally in her care, and she could have disposed of his body in an attempt to cover it up. But there's no proof, and it's all basically just speculation by now. Even after all these years, the case still remains as one of Australia's most baffling mysteries. Jane Doe, Amber Ray Johnston. When two seemingly unrelated incidents occur within a short time span, there's always a chance they're not as unrelated as they seem. The case of Anston County's Jane Doe is a strange one. It's an unsolved mystery that, like most Jane Doe cases, is built entirely on speculation. In August 2021, a woman was caught on a trail camera deep in the woods of Wadesboro, North Carolina. She was completely unidentified, appearing to be between 30 and 40 years old. She was half naked and was wandering the dense forest in the middle of the night. Later footage showed her again, this time holding a large stick, seemingly in distress. She passed the camera several times before vanishing. No one ever saw her again. Months later, in February 2022, a group of rabbit hunters stumbled upon a backpack in the same area. They ransacked it, but ultimately left it behind. For a while, nothing came of it, until a few months later when a woman's skeletal remains were found in the same woods. The police quickly connected the dots. They speculated that the woman in the footage and the remains belonged to the same person, but when they attempted to identify her, the investigation led nowhere. Several missing persons were considered, including a woman named April Reed, who had disappeared around the same time the footage was captured, but dental records ruled her out, as well as every other possible match. With no DNA leads, no belongings except for the backpack, and no other clues beyond the grainy trail cam footage, the woman remains unidentified to this day. Her case is still open, and her identity is still unknown. Flame of red hair. When it comes to the wilderness, something as simple as just a hike can turn deadly if not done by someone with experience. Brendan and Sailor were simply two friends who set out for what should have been a day out in nature. But when nature decides to be unforgiving, things never go as planned. Sailor Gilliams and Brendan Vega were two friends who went hiking on the Cold Spring Trail in Santa Barbara in March of 2014. Since it was ultimately just a little hike in the afternoon, they didn't think much of it. They unfortunately hadn't exactly prepared for how tricky the terrain would get once the sun started going down. As darkness set in, the rough terrain became an absolute menace for them and ended up in a horrible tragedy. Since they couldn't see where they were going in the darkness, both of them slipped and injured themselves brutally. Brendan had hurt his arm badly, while Sailor suffered 2 broken ankles and a fractured wrist. He tried to carry her for a bit, but injured himself further in doing that. So he made the decision to leave Sailor at the trail to look for help. That decision, while technically the right one, ended in tragedy. Brendan was trying to go back to his car, but the darkness became his biggest enemy. He ended up falling to his death from a ledge. The next morning, another group of hikers came across Sailor, still alive but severely injured, unable to move. She was airlifted to the hospital and treated for her injuries. What basically saved her life was her bright red hair that she dyed only some time ago. In the pictures the second hiking group had taken, there's a small dot of her hair in the background. Newlyweds. Eric Hutchinson and Samantha Miller had spent their entire special day celebrating. They were a couple who had just tied the knot 5 hours ago in a gorgeous wedding in Foley Beach, South Carolina. For them, their ceremony and reception were perfect. They were enjoying themselves, taking pictures, and just being happy in each other's company like any other newly married couple. Disturbingly, as they left their reception in a golf cart decorated with a "Just Married" sign, they had no idea it would be their last ride together. Their golf cart was crashed into by a car going at a scary 65 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. The driver of the car, Jamie Lee Komorski, was drunk out of her mind and slammed her car into them from the back. Samantha, the bride, was still in her wedding dress and was tragically killed instantly. Eric survived but was left with a brain injury and multiple broken bones. But the worst of it was the unimaginable grief of losing his wife just hours after saying "I do." 2 of their family members riding with them were also seriously injured. According to Eric, during Komorski's trial, Samantha's last words to him that night were that she didn't want it to end. Komorski later pleaded guilty to felony DUI and reckless homicide. She ended up receiving a 25-year prison sentence. Eric and Samantha's family were awarded a $1.3 million settlement. Unfortunately, no amount of money could ever make up for the beautiful life lost that day in an accident that could have been easily avoided. One of the last photos of the couple was taken at their reception, and the 2 smiling brightly, completely unaware that their perfect day would end in tragedy. Danwon Student's Ferry Incident. One of South Korea's deadliest ferry disasters was the sinking of MV Sewol. The vessel was on its way from Incheon to Jeju Island with 476 passengers when it capsized off the southwestern coast. Out of everyone on board, 304 lost their lives, most of which were high school students on their way to a casually fun trip before the responsibility of senior year set in. The ferry trip was supposed to be a relaxing getaway for these students so they could wind down. Like any group of teenagers on a trip, they took pictures, laughed, joked around, and just enjoyed themselves. Even when things started going wrong, they weren't panicking because they believed rescue would come soon. Which, in hindsight, was an absolutely terrible call that cost hundreds of lives. It becomes even crazier when you realize that as the ship was actively sinking, most of the crew, including the captain, ditched the passengers and got themselves to safety. The people who managed to survive only did so because they refused to listen to the unhinged orders passed by the captain. Instead of staying inside the ship, They jumped out and were eventually rescued by fishing boats and commercial vessels nearby. But for those who trusted the orders given to them, most of them being the students, the outcome was devastating. They believed they would be saved. Even in their final pictures and videos, they looked calm and completely unaware of just how bad things really were. The tragedy didn't just shake South Korea, it sent shockwaves through the entire country's political system. What followed was a massive unveiling of years of corruption and failures at every level. But for the families of the victims, no amount of outrage or reform could ever bring back what they lost. Level 4. Tyree Sampson. A fun day out with family and friends should not turn into an irreversible tragedy that destroys lives. However, Tyree Sampson was not extended that courtesy from fate when he fell from a free-fall drop ride in Orlando, Florida. Tyree was only 14 when he and his football team went to the Icon Park in Orlando, Florida for a day out. They had been going on all the rides, but Tyree was refused most of them because of his height. At just 14, Tyree was over 6 feet tall and weighed about 380 pounds. However, as fate would have it, the free-fall drop ride operators allowed Tyree to ride it. Here's where the operator and owner's negligence comes in. Like most over-the-top dangerous rides in amusement parks, this one also had safety limitations. The most obvious one was the ride's weight limit for riders, which was only 287 pounds, in contrast to Tyree's over 300-pound build. For some odd reason, he was still allowed to go on it. To accommodate his big size and height, Tyree was not only not harnessed in properly, his seatbelt had been manually loosened and adjusted accordingly. The seat's danger light had even come on, but the workers there, being new, thought it meant everything was okay. According to Tyree's friends, he was already very nervous about the ride and had a bad feeling about it. He went as far as to tell them, "Tell my parents I love them." As the ride began, Tyree fell from a 100-foot drop and was killed instantly. Doctors confirmed that he died on impact due to blunt force trauma. A photo of Tyree before the ride began started circulating online, showing him on the far right looking particularly nervous. A year after his death, his mother recalled how traumatic and horrible the entire ordeal was for him. She had sued not only the amusement park for its gross negligence, but also every party involved, including the operator of the ride, the company behind the ride, and the company that made the ride's chairs and harnesses. Tyree's parents also pushed towards demolishing this particular ride completely, which they managed to succeed a year later. His mother believes this may not bring closure to her son's death, but she's still grateful the park cooperated and took it down. Christopher McCandles. Christopher McCandles, or as he liked to call himself, Alexander Supertramp, was an American man who was highly fascinated with the idea of a nomadic lifestyle. He'd always wanted to become one with nature, and one day simply decided to ditch society and live off the land. That is when he found his way into the Alaskan wilderness in hopes of finding a deeper meaning in life and maybe just some freedom from the overly complex city life. It was April of 1992 when he found an old abandoned bus 142, and made it his home. His plan and ultimate goal was to live in the bus and survive on whatever he could hunt or forage from the nature around him. For the next 113 days, Chris lived in complete solitude. He documented his experiences in a journal and took pictures, fully embracing what he thought was true freedom. But things took a turn when food, in reality, became extremely scarce. He found himself struggling to find enough nutrition to sustain himself. Some believe he ate toxic wild sweet vetch seeds, which accelerated his severe malnutrition. Ultimately, he became so weak and undernourished that he did not even have the energy to get help for his dying body. His final picture is one of the most haunting images tied to his story. In it, he's sitting near the bus looking incredibly thin but still smiling. He's holding a note that reads, "I have had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye and may God bless all." It's eerie because despite his obvious starvation and isolation, he looks at peace. It almost looks like he had made his choice and was okay with it. Chris's story has sparked endless debates all over the world. Some see him as a committed man who simply followed his dream. while others think he was an extremist who was unprepared and reckless. Semra Aysal. There are some crimes in this world that don't even sound real because of how cruel and calculated they are, except there's nothing fake about them. The case of Hakan Aysal and his wife Semra Aysal is one of those highly tragic and disturbing cases that make you question the very people you love. In June 2018, the couple was on vacation in beautiful Butterfly Valley in Mughla, Turkey. For Semra, the entire trip was supposed to be a picture-perfect getaway, but she had no clue how disturbing it would get in the next few hours. At the time of this getaway, Semra was 32 years old and 7 months pregnant. She was desperately afraid of heights, but had given in to her husband's relentless insistence on taking a hike. Like any normal couple would on a trip like this, the two were very immersed and took lots of pictures. One of the last ones captured her sitting near the edge of a cliff and having an absolutely dazzling smile on her face. It's so tragic how she was completely unaware of what was about to happen next. Minutes after the picture was taken, Semra's husband Hakan pushed her off the cliff she was sitting on the edge of. She fell 1,000 feet to her death. When the police first arrived at the scene, Hakan made the entire thing look like a tragic accident. But nothing was adding up, and Hakan's act started looking sketchy really fast. Authorities found out that Hakan had taken out a life insurance policy on Semra just before their trip. It would pay him around $25,000 in the event of her accidental death. That's precisely what he did when he murdered her. He claimed it instantly. Witnesses who were nearby also said that Hakan was acting way too calm for someone who just lost his pregnant wife. The investigation dragged on for years, but in 2022, the court found him guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced him to life in prison. Bart Whitaker graduation dinner. Bart Whitaker was a 23-year-old recent graduate from Sam Houston State University, Texas, who had been celebrating his graduation with his family just hours before everything fell apart. He, his parents, Trisha and Kent, and his 19-year-old brother Kevin had gone out to dinner for the occasion, even gifting him a $4,000 Rolex for his accomplishments. Everything seemed perfectly blissful, until they returned to their Sugarland, Texas home and were ambushed. A neighbor who rushed over after hearing the commotion later described the scene as absolutely brutal. They found Kent, the father, lying on the porch with a gunshot wound and immediately gave him emergency aid. This quick thinking from the neighbor ultimately saved Kent's life. Unfortunately, fate was not as merciful to Kevin and Trisha, who both succumbed to their injuries. Bart, on the other hand, escaped almost completely unscathed. That particular detail, Bart walking away unharmed while his family was slaughtered, immediately caught investigators' attention. He was initially cooperative, but his stories weren't adding up, almost like he was being deliberately vague. That's when the police started digging into his past at the university and looking into his friends. So many disturbing details came to light, but the worst was the fact that Bart hadn't been enrolled at Sam Houston State University at all. He had been lying to his parents for years, even going so far as to stage a graduation dinner. It was the very same dinner that ended with most of his family dead. Investigators soon found out that Bart had mentioned wanting to get rid of his parents multiple times in front of his friends. That's when the pieces finally fell into place. 2 of Bart's friends were arrested and revealed the entire truth. Bart had orchestrated a hit on his family and had hired his ex-roommates to carry out the attack. His motive was to get the inheritance. This included his parents' Sugarland house and the $1 million under their name. To him, killing them was the easiest way to get it. When you look back at the pictures from that night, nothing seems off. The family is smiling, completely unaware of what's about to happen. They look like the happiest family in that restaurant. The Girl in the Box. The case of Ursula Herrmann is one of the most haunting and disturbing tragedies to have left a mark on the German people. This is a relatively old case. In 1981, 10-year-old Ursula Herrmann was cycling home from her cousin's house when she was kidnapped. It was a route she knew well and had taken plenty of times before, so her short ride through the forest should have been perfectly safe. But sadly, Ursula never made it home that night. Her family quickly reported her missing, and an extensive search was underway. Unfortunately, nothing came out of it, and Ursula's parents were losing hope as the hours passed. After a few days, they found newfound strength in a ransom note that was demanding 2 million Deutschmarks from her parents. The family was obviously prepared to comply with every demand the kidnappers put out, but things went horribly wrong when they had their communication cut. Disturbingly, 2 weeks after the entire failed ransom ordeal, authorities discovered a buried box in the forest near where Ursula had disappeared. When they looked inside, their worst fears had come true. In the box was Ursula's lifeless body. It was an especially thin one that was designed as a makeshift cell. The kidnappers had equipped it with a bit of ventilation, food, water, and even reading material. However, because of the muddy area and rainy weather, the ventilation system failed, and the girl suffocated to death inside. Mendez brothers on a baseball card. The Mendez brothers have been a hot topic in the mainstream and online crime discussion spaces for a long time now. It's one of the most famous modern true crime cases in history, not only because of the nature of the crime, but because of the ambiguity surrounding it. Lyle and Eric Mendez were two kids raised in a household others would consider highly privileged and desirable. Their father, Jose Mendez, was a famous Hollywood executive who made plenty of money for his family to live not only just in comfort, but in complete luxury. Their mother, Kitty, was a loving woman who seemingly devoted her entire life to loving her husband and children. But beneath that seemingly perfect and enviable facade was a disturbing life that left all the members involved extremely traumatized. In 1989, the Mendez house became the epicenter of a devastating crime. Jose and Kitty, the evidently perfect parents to two amazing boys, were shot brutally in the middle of their living room. The crime scene was so horrific that police were positive it wasn't done by an amateur and was a professional hit. While everything surrounding their parents' murder was being investigated, Eric and Lyle tried to move on with their lives, but the way they coped with their grief eventually became the brothers' downfall. For siblings who had just lost their parents in a brutal hit, Eric and Lyle were thriving. They were indulging themselves to the fullest and were spending large sums of money on literally everything they could. One of those indulgences was a Knicks game in New York where they were captured sitting courtside behind player Mark Jackson in a now notorious picture. This definitely raised a lot of suspicions, and it was eventually revealed that the ones responsible for Jose and Kitty's murder were the two brothers themselves. The brothers eventually revealed that despite how it felt, the crime was never about the money. They further disclosed the unquestionably harrowing abuse they suffered at the hands of their own father. The worst part is that the extremity of the abuse they claimed to have been put through went way beyond anything we could ever imagine. Ultimately, the brothers were tried and sentenced to life in prison. That particular Knicks game snap card is exceedingly creepy because of how serene and normal it is. Sort of like the calm before a storm. Before the arrests, before the trials, before the life sentences. Travis Alexander. In June 2008, a 30-year-old man by the name of Travis Alexander was found dead in his shower in Arizona. The crime scene was easily one of the most brutal things the police had ever witnessed. Travis didn't die randomly. He had been stabbed nearly 30 times. After that, his murderer decapitated him and shot him in the head for good measure. It was clear that whoever did this to him did it out of pure malicious rage and evilness. Travis was a motivational speaker and a salesman. He was a successful man known for his charm and happy vibes. So naturally, his death sent shockwaves through everyone who knew him and was close to him. But investigators and Travis's friends didn't take long to zero in on one person, his ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias. Travis's friends knew something was off about Jodi and his relationship. They were on and off constantly and were known in their circle to be highly messy and toxic. People, and later the prosecution of the case, portrayed Jody as someone who was obsessed with him. They told police of how odd and borderline insane she would act with him. She was constantly jealous and insecure and was even outright stalking him at times. It was so bad that she even moved from California to Arizona just to be closer to him, despite the fact that they were supposedly broken up prior. Jody initially rebutted, saying she hadn't seen Travis in months, but the digital camera found at the crime scene told another story completely. The camera had actual photos of the two together at his house on the same day he was killed. The most chilling part was that some pictures showed him alive and completely relaxed just minutes before the attack. The camera also had pictures taken after the crime. Jody and her lawyers claimed Travis had been abusive. She had no choice but to fight back and accidentally killed him in self-defense. But considering how violent the attack was, the jurors of the case weren't too convinced by it. They called the crime scene a slaughter. Jody was convicted of first-degree murder in 2013. Prosecutors wanted the death penalty, but instead, she got life in prison without parole. Level 5. Murder of Brittany Gargle. Brittany Gargle and her friend Cheyenne Rose were having an enjoyable night out when tragedy struck and Brittany lost her life. It was March 2015, and the two had decided to go out to a local bar for some drinks. They commemorated the occasion by taking a selfie, which later became the biggest piece of evidence in the investigation that was about to happen. Things took a dark turn at an undisclosed time during the night. An argument broke out between them, and Cheyenne abandoned Brittany at the bar. Unfortunately, Brittany never made it home. Her body was discovered the next morning with a belt lying close by. The belt was the murder weapon used to strangle Brittany Gargle. At first, Cheyenne acted like a concerned friend. She posted on Brittany's Facebook page asking their mutuals if anyone had seen her since the night before. She even asked her uncle to be her alibi. But investigators started piecing things together. The infamous selfie Brittany and Cheyenne took that night became the biggest clue. The belt Cheyenne was wearing in the picture was the exact same one found at the crime scene. It was literally what she used to kill her friend. When confronted about it, she initially denied everything. But eventually, when more evidence started coming out against her, she admitted to killing Brittany. However, she later claimed she couldn't remember doing it because they were both drunk. In the end, she pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Anne Faber selfie. Anne Faber was a 25-year-old woman from the Netherlands who was out for a bike ride near Utrecht when she was killed. Faber really enjoyed the outdoors and would go to get fresh air whenever she had the chance. That's precisely what she did in September of 2017, but ended up losing her life to a monster. Faber had just started her biking session when it started pouring down. She took a hilarious selfie of herself with a funny face and a victory sign and sent it to her boyfriend. It felt like a funny jab at the unaccommodating weather, considering how her face was wet and visible area behind her felt really muddy. However, what seemed like a casual picture ended up becoming the last she would ever take. After sending the selfie to her boyfriend, Anne Faber disappeared. She didn't come home that evening, which caused her friends and family to panic. They called the police, and an area-wide search was underway. Unfortunately, despite looking extensively, there were no signs of her anywhere near the place she went missing. After a few days, though, Faber's family's biggest fears came true. Anne Faber's body was found in a secluded area near the biking path she went missing on. She had stab wounds on her body, and it was clear that whoever killed her had been planning it. After the investigation, the police were quickly led to Michael P. He was a convicted offender who had been staying at a nearby psychiatric clinic because of his criminal past. P had a history of violent crimes and was about to be reintroduced to society after extensive treatment at the facility. Clearly, he wasn't ready to, because he readily confessed to Anne's kidnapping and subsequent murder. In 2019, he was sentenced to 28 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Aurora Theater mass shooting. James Holmes was the evil man responsible for the Aurora Theater shooting in 2012. It was a mass shooting that occurred in a Century 16 theater that was showing a screening of The Dark Knight Rises. It resulted in 13 people dead and over 70 people gravely injured. Before he carried out one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history, Holmes had taken some disturbing selfies. Most of them showed him posing with guns with his hair dyed bright orange. The most unsettling part was that Holmes actually looked like he was having the time of his life with what he was about to do. These pictures definitely didn't look like they were being taken by a guy who was about to ruin more than dozens of countless lives. According to later reports, this monster had spent months preparing for the atrocities he was about to commit. They weren't spontaneous or a result of someone unexpectedly losing their mind. He legally bought multiple firearms and stocked up on thousands of rounds of ammo. He even rigged his own apartment with homemade explosives in the very likely case someone came to look for him there. His plan was fully thought through, and his demeanor in his selfies he took that night just made it clearer how inherently evil this man was. He walked into a packed midnight screening of The Dark Knight Rises a few hours after his little photo shoot and opened fire. By the time it was over, 13 people were dead, 70 were injured, and an entire community was left in shock. Those pictures later surfaced in court and became one of the most haunting pieces of evidence of his harrowing crime. Reinaldo Dagsa. Imagine catching your murderer in the act right before you're about to get killed. That's exactly what happened to Reinaldo Dagsa on New Year's Day 2011. He was a Filipino politician who ultimately became a victim of political spite. Dagsa was outside his home on Tuna Street in Caloocan City with his family and was taking a simple picture of them. It was supposed to be just another picture to capture a happy moment until it became something much, much darker. In the background of the image, you can clearly see a man aiming a gun directly at Dagsa. The picture clearly shows not only the shooter being seconds away from pulling the trigger, but also another man standing on the lookout for him. Unfortunately, as his killers had intended, Dagsa was shot in the chest and succumbed to his wounds almost instantly. In a cruel twist of fate, Dagsa's final act was unknowingly taking a picture of the very man who would end his life. His own shot became the image that ended up becoming the key piece of evidence that led to the killer's arrest. Dagsa was known for his work in community peacekeeping, and apparently, that's exactly what led to his death. His family in the photo was smiling brightly and had no idea what was about to happen. The tragedy of this moment is hard to even put into words. The Red Lake Suitcase. In June of 2017, travel vlogger Sarah Funks took a trip to Cyprus's infamous Red Lake. The site is known for its eerie red hue that makes it almost feel like a pool of blood. Like any other travel vlogger, Funks was taking pictures and filming herself when she saw and captured a weird log floating in the lake. At the time, the woman didn't think much of it and just resumed her activities. However, 2 years later, in 2019, Cypriot authorities linked that log she captured to one of the more famous serial killers to take root in the country. They uncovered a series of extremely violent murders associated with a Greek Cypriot army officer, Nikos Metaxas. Metaxas murdered around 7 people in the span of 2 years between 2016 and 2018. He had subsequently disposed of their remains by shoving them into suitcases and dumping them into the Mistero Red Lake, the same lake Sarah had filmed. That same suitcase she unknowingly captured on camera. When she found out, Sarah was absolutely devastated. She immediately took down her original video and made it clear that she didn't want attention on herself, but rather on the victims of this horrific crime. Looking back, she admitted the lake had felt a little eerie during her visit, but she never meant it in such a literal sense. Level 6. Santa Claus Serial Killer. Bruce MacArthur seemed like your typical friendly old man. He was a landscaper who came off as a kind person who just seemed to blend into the background of everyday life. During the holidays, he worked as a mall Santa, which naturally meant he was a fan favorite there and had been captured on camera multiple times in his Father Christmas outfit. First glance at him would make everyone think he was just a regular, harmless guy. But Bruce was a monster hidden beneath all that harmless persona. Between 2010 and 2017, Bruce MacArthur had preyed on multiple unguarded men from Toronto's LGBTQ+ community. His entire modus operandi consisted of him getting close to them and luring them in. He would then resort to killing them and then disposing of their bodies in planters around the city. Because of his work as a landscaper, no one ever questioned the massive plants he put inside his clients' houses. And definitely no one could imagine he would put his victims' dismembered bodies there. For years, people kept on going missing. However, there was absolutely no proof he was responsible for it. There was no concrete evidence that ever pointed towards him being a serial killer. That is, until 2018, when police finally raided his apartment. They found disturbing evidence, including photos of his victims taken after their deaths. That's when the full scope of his crimes came to light. In January 2019, MacArthur pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. Looking back at those holiday photos of MacArthur dressed as Santa feels sickening now. It simply shows us how looks can definitely be deceiving, and a person shouldn't be trusted simply based on face value. Tyler Hadley. Tyler Hadley was just 17 when he did something that still chills people to this day. On July 16, 2011, in Port St. Lucie, Florida, he murdered his parents, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, with a hammer. He proceeded to then clean the blood and shift their bodies to the master bedroom. After that, as if celebrating his little act of defiance, Hadley then threw a party of over 60 people at the very house he had just brutally killed his parents in. Like most teenage parties, this one also had ample drinking, blasting music, and trashing the place. But what makes this one stand out is the fact that the attendees were completely unaware that Tyler's parents were dead just a few feet away. As the night went on, Hadley started to drop hints, almost like he couldn't wait to show off. He confessed the entire thing to his friend Michael Mandel, and then proceeded to take the ladder to the bedroom where Hadley's parents lay dead. Even after that, the party continued and Mandel hung around. At some point during the night, the two even took a photo together. It showed Mandel and Hadley standing with one of them holding an orange party cup. The eeriness came from the supposed normalcy of the picture. No one could tell it was of someone who had just destroyed his own family and displayed their bodies proudly in literally the next room. The next morning, Hadley's reckless bragging finally caught up with him. Mandel called the cops on him, and he was arrested on the spot. In court, he pleaded no contest and was sentenced to life in prison. Jesse Lewis. Jesse Lewis's parents did not know that the last picture they would take of their child on the morning of the 14th of December 2014 would be the last before his heroic death. 6-year-old Jesse Lewis was just another happy kid who was excited to go to school. On the day he lost his life, he traced a big "I love you" for his mom on her car and smiled for the picture she took of him. Hours later, his mother received the news no parent should have to go through. A gunman had stormed into Sandy Hook Elementary School and opened fire at everyone he could see. When he entered Jesse's classroom and stopped to reload, Jesse saw his chance. The 6-year-old yelled at his classmates to run, and because of that, 9 kids made it out alive. His courageous act saved countless lives, but unfortunately, Jesse lost his own in the process. Imagine that. A 6-year-old kid who's barely out of kindergarten is able to make a split-second decision that saves lives while losing his own. What's even more heartbreaking is that completely ordinary picture his mom took that morning that was all smiles and positive vibes. His mother, Scarlett Lewis, turned her grief into something powerful. She started the Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement and is now dedicating her life to teaching kids about compassion and emotional resilience. Because if Jesse, at just 6 years old, could show that kind of bravery, then maybe the rest of us can carry on his legacy in some way. Pictures of a grave. The Moors' murders were a series of particularly sadistic crimes that stand as a chilling chapter in British criminal history. They were carried out in the 1960s by a couple who went by the names of Ian Brandy and Myra Hindley. Their modus operandi was to lure, kidnap, and eventually murder their victims after having enough of them. In the years they were active, they had killed at least 5 children. But in case that wasn't horrifying enough, there was this one particular image of the woman, Myrna Hindley, that elevated things to cosmic levels of disturbing. It's a picture of Hindley standing on the moors while clutching her little dog Puppet. At first glance, it's just a woman posing with her pet in an empty landscape. But in reality, she was standing on top of one of her victims' graves, looking at it keenly. Imagine taking a picture right on top of the body of someone you tortured and killed. That's exactly what Hindley did. This wasn't just a coincidence either. Brady and Hindley were known for documenting their crimes. They used to take extremely gruesome pictures and recordings of their victims during the act of inflicting pain on them. And now, that single image of Hindley and her dog became a chilling piece of evidence. The level of remorselessness it takes to stand there posing so casually over a victim's grave is beyond comprehension. Level 7. Shania Davis. Shania Davis was just 5 years old when she was taken from the world in one of the most heartbreaking ways imaginable. She was reported missing from her home in Fayetteville, North Carolina in November of 2019. But as authorities got a hold of her case and started digging deeper, the truth that was showing itself was even more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Surveillance footage captured Shania being carried into a hotel by a man named Mario Andrade McNeil. She looked small and innocent, completely unaware of the horror about to unfold. That image alone is enough to haunt anyone. It was the last time she was seen alive. Days later, Shania's body was discovered in a wooded area. The investigation revealed the most disturbing detail ever. It was Shania's own mother, Antoinette Davis, who had essentially sold her to drug dealers. The woman was arrested and charged with human trafficking and abuse. McNeil was convicted of her murder. While both of them received their fair share of sentences, no one can deny how purely sinister they were. They snuffed a young life simply because they had the power to. Xavier Deligon. Xavier Dupont de Ligón was a seemingly highly respectable French aristocrat with an almost storybook-level perfect life. He had a wife and 4 kids and lived in a scenic area in Nantes. But like most of these cases, Xavier was another wolf in sheep's clothing. In April of 2011, Xavier's entire family, his wife Agnes, their 4 kids, and 2 dogs were found in their garden dead. The only one missing from the pile of bodies was Xavier himself. The eerie part about this is that for days after Xavier murdered his family, no one really made a big deal out of their disappearance. No one came to check on them, believing they were fine and were just preparing to move to Australia. However, when there was no sight of the entire family for more than a week, police finally jumped in and broke into the house. What they found was straight out of a nightmare. According to the speculated chain of events, the family had been drugged and shot execution style with a .22 caliber rifle. The only thing that linked it to Xavier was the fact that he had conveniently inherited a similar one from his father just 3 months prior. Unfortunately, despite the staggering evidence against him, Xavier was never to be seen again. He was last seen on April 15th on the security footage for the Formula One hotel in Roquebrune-sur-Argonne 10 days after the crime. And while the case did become a national obsession, nothing too tangible came out of the torrent of theories. To this day, Xavier Dupont de Ligón had not been found and remains one of France's biggest mysteries.